welcome to the return of 4020 Not Live. As you may have noticed, we weren't here on Monday, but we're here now. Now Origin's just finished, Phil. And the excitement of a dead rubber and New South Wales won, and everyone goes, oh, that's exciting.
That spoilt it for anybody who was listening to the podcast and recorded the game. But the amazing thing is, 75,000 people turned up for a game that we were told was dead and didn't matter. But what an astonishing concept that they've come up with here, that people will buy into it even though the result of that individual game doesn't matter. Again, we shouldn't necessarily just ape everything that they do, but clearly they've got something there. And yes, a very expansive New South Wales compared to the previous two games paid off for them. Great debut for young centre Bradman Best. And I would imagine that Brad Fittler probably will go into a meeting about his future in a lot more confident vein of form. But James Tedesco was fantastic, even though he was under huge criticism. And Coyington didn't really have any last tackle plays. But series ends 2-1 and people still love it.
And did anyone talk after? I mean, I know we finished exactly bang on time. Did we see any people speak to the media after the game? Or are they still not talking? I don't know.
I had to rush here to be with you rather than follow the post-match, but I'm sure we'll catch up on it.
In the olden days, James, of course, they used to send English referees out to do Origin. Would you like to have done that in your career?
Yeah, it would have been a fantastic experience. I think that I don't know who was the last referee to have done that, to be honest. I think it's not in my living memory, I don't think. Might be wrong, but it would have been a fantastic experience to go down under and referee one of those games. Just something special, aren't they?
We're going to have to talk about referees, unfortunately, again, not because of referees, but because of people. But one thing that obviously has happened in Australia in the past, and they have different ways of refereeing things to us. They have two referees, we don't, or whatever. And the bunker checking every try, that's something we can't do here because we don't have a video referee at every game. But if we did, would you like that kind of? I don't know, does it take the pressure off the referee or run more that every decision involving a score is scrutinised?
I like the review system that they have in the NRL now, where they award the try, and then and then it gets reviewed by the bunker automatically, and if they have concerns about it, it then gets referred from on field back to the bunker, albeit it's the bunker that's telling the referee to bring it back, send it upstairs, really. But I like that system. It seems to work well. Whether you could do that, I mean, it looks like the RFL are looking to move to all games on some form of TV broadcast next year. But whether they can introduce a review system in that, it will all depend on the number of cameras that they have at each game. I suspect they probably won't be able to go to that system. But from a referee's point of view, having the facility to have your decision checked is always a good thing. And not just from a referee's point of view, from the game's point of view, the game doesn't want to see errors. And I think I wasn't really watching the Origin game intently. I sort of had it on in the background this morning, but I did see a couple of decisions that were awarded on field and then were reviewed and overturned. And without that system, or without a video referee, they would have been awarded as you could clearly see, and they would have been, had an impact on the outcome of that game potentially.
And they did it very quickly as well. There was no dissent in the crowd or why are we waiting chance of 3 minutes. It went up. The referee quite understandably, particularly for one of them, which literally came off a fingertip, gave the try. And on review, it was clear that there had been a New South Wales touch and it needed to be disallowed. And again, no dissent. It worked perfectly.
The bunker system works really well. I've visited the bunker in Sydney. It's a fantastic facility, and multi-million dollars have no doubt been spent on it. And the video referees can control their own replays. They've got access to every angle. They're in charge of what they look at and how they look at it and the speed at which they look at it, which I think speeds up the efficiency of the process. And in an ideal world, you'd move to that sort of system, and I guess that's what they have in with a VAR system in football. But we're talking about the level of investment that the sport wants to make into that. And whilst we saw in the the World Cup, the introduction of the Captain's Challenge, that wasn't that smooth in my view, because it involves a broadcaster, and a broadcaster, no disrespect to BBC, that doesn't always broadcast games week in, week out, albeit they were using some directors from Sky. So the process becomes a little bit more clunky once you have that. And for me, it's about a spectacle for not only for people in the stadium, but people at home. It needs to be efficient.
It might be easier to train match officials in basic vision mixing rather than train experienced and highly skilled television operatives in the rules and laws of rugby league and so on and so forth. Phil, you were at Salford on Sunday, and I've looked at the scoreline. Salford 14, Leeds 16, and it's been a long 30-year bugbear of mine, of course, that when Wakefield were knocked out of the Challenge Cup in 1993 to Bradford Northern, that Neil Summers put the ball nowhere near the try line, and Wakefield lost by 2 points. Now, it would be easy for me to, for the last 30 years, harbour a grudge against Bradford Northern, and Robin Whitfield, a match official on that occasion. But really, Wakefield lost that game because Peter Benson missed a load of goal kicks, and we would have been through to the next round and probably lost to Wigan or whoever. What happened? I mean, obviously, Phil, for all the Salford fans who are watching or listening, you're completely biased. What happened on Sunday?
Salford were in control of their own destiny, as most teams are in every game, and had some issues that they didn't resolve themselves. But we live in a blame culture, so obviously it was purely the referee's fault that they lost. The truth is that they scored 3 tries to 2. They had opportunities with goal kicking to win the game. The penalty that actually decided the game came from a dropout from Mark Sneed sailing out on the full. I'm pretty sure, having watched the replay, that Aaron Moore didn't take that dropout. Now, while Salford fans highlighted on social media some of the issues that they felt aggrieved about, where they hadn't got the rub of the green, again, we are living in a culture where it has to be somebody's fault when something happens that we don't like. And what you tend not to do then is look at yourself and the kind of things that you could have done better. All 3 tries that Salford scored came from kicks. They dropped quite a lot of ball in the first half when they had the majority of the play. Individually, you can pick out as many issues as you want and say, clearly there were a couple where a kicker has kicked through, and it's that minimal split second. Did they get taken out after the ball had gone? Did somebody deliberately step across their line? Unless you've got the kind of footage that we get on Sky on a match day evening, a fan's camera from behind the post is not the same. There was clearly a feeling before the game kicked off that some of the Salford fans were going to be aggrieved whatever happened if they didn't win the game. They were quite an angry bunch, particularly in the main stand. And that's there to intimidate the match officials, and that's perfectly acceptable. But at some point, you've got to look at what you're not doing that could have influenced the outcome of the game. And that may sound to particularly fans of the team that lost that's soft soaping over the issue. I'm pretty sure as well that there were some 50-50 calls that went against Leeds. It wasn't that determined the outcome. Whilst ever that might be hard for Salford fans to hear. What I would say is that in Tim Laffey, they had by far the best player on the field. Leeds could not handle him. He was absolutely brilliant. It was a man of the match award that could have been given at half time. I'm not sure that the Salford players played off him enough, or the Salford halfbacks played to him enough. Certainly, Brodie Croft didn't look fully fit to me. Mark Sneed wasn't fully fit, came off with a leg injury. Ryan Briley, who has been so influential this year, again, coming back from injury, didn't look at his absolute best, nor Andy Ackers. They all played very well, but not as crisply as they had been playing when Salford were dominant. So we can either talk about what happened on the field, deficiencies in both of the teams, the fact that Leeds hung in there, just about did enough to get a win in a manner that they perhaps haven't so much this year. Or we could talk about referees. I'd rather go down the route of the former, to be honest.
I mean, now we're 3 days detached from this, it seems a long time ago. I mean, when we talk about Friday's games, it'd be even longer, of course. But that initial anger, and now, where was I on Sunday? I don't even know where I was on Sunday. Obviously, it wasn't at Salford. But that initial anger you just read, and you go like, I think the first time I was alerted to it was the tweet saying Aaron Moore should be hanged, which, you know, he's slightly harsh. And the person who did that has been banned from Twitter, which is amusing in this current era. When supporters tagging the club and their chief executive, I think there's an onus there on, I keep saying every week, the club and those involved to actually put a stop to these things. But I feel like we're just asking this. We're going around in a circle over and over, James. Every week something seems to happen where everyone gets upset about it. And I think the best tweet I've seen this week was I can't remember who it was now, saying, you know, if you can't accept referees are going to make mistakes, then find something else to do on a weekend, because everyone makes mistakes. Referees, officials, broadcasters, everyone.
Absolutely. No, you do feel like you're banging your head against a brick wall. And look, it'll probably be forever and a day that referees will get criticised, perhaps unfairly, in the sense that, you know, a supporter will always seek to blame the referee or somebody else externally other than their own team. And as Phil's rightly said, you know, they had a drop out that went out on the full, which was a penalty 10 metres in front of the sticks, gifted 2 points to Leeds. They also gave away 2 other penalty goals in that game. A sort of a no attempt to tackle on a kicker penalty that led to 2 points, and there was the what was the other one? Oh, the Partington late hit, which led to another 2 points. There were 6 points that they in effect gave to Leeds, from which they kicked penalty goals. So, you know, they have to look at their own discipline. 11-5 penalty count, but when you look at the breakdown of those penalties, you've got 6 for foul play. One's a restart, which is the goal line dropout. 3 for offside, and 1 for a ball steal. I don't really know how the referee can not give those penalties. That's up to the team to not concede penalties, and the consequence of penalties, as we all know, can lead to points. So, you know, I'm not suggesting that the performance was perfect, and, you know, for me, there were a couple of errors. You know, that it should have been a penalty to Salford for the block when the 2 Leeds players came together. That probably was in kickable position, but, you know, there's other things that go into it. And yes, there was an escort on Briley, I think it was, and yes, he made a meal of it, but it still should have been a penalty. And again, that would have been a kickable distance. But to then point the finger solely at the referee is just not right. And, you know, I don't know how many times you can really sort of repeat the same message in that, yes, referees will make mistakes in the same way players will make mistakes, as we've proven, and coaches will make mistakes. Unfortunately, as you know, you hope as a referee that the mistakes you do make don't impact or have too much of an impact on the result, and it's up to the teams to try and avoid the referee coming into the equation. And it's up to referees to try and improve their performances. And that's really as simple as it gets. I mean, I did that same fixture a few years ago, and I had beer thrown at me as I left that field. Brian McDermott, the Leeds coach at the time, came on and sort of shook my hand, which probably inflamed the situation in front of the Salford fans. And he sort of apologised to me afterwards for he'd felt guilty for almost creating a situation which stalled me in my exit from the field, but shouldn't happen. And I think I've said it on Radio Leeds last week that it was at Salford again when they played Castleford. Yes, it was a Castleford fan, but a woman ran on the field during the game to protest at me. So, you know, I don't know. Referees are too easy to throw pot shots at. That's not to say they're perfect. That's not to say they don't make mistakes. That's not to say people can't criticise them, but criticise them, don't abuse them, and don't suggest that they cheat, because they simply don't.
Right, I think you need to look at the Cameron Smith try as well, which Leeds scored. And again, you know, the referee is not involved in that. It's a great piece of opportunism from the player himself. But you'd have to say that if you were a coach and you were looking at the defensive pattern, they didn't move up quick enough to try and hold him out. And that's had more destructive value in terms of the final score than the referee potentially missing something on one side. But also equally, again, he would say that, wouldn't he? But we haven't looked through all the incidents whereby perhaps Leeds had a 50-50 foot call go against them. And obviously Salford fans will say, oh, if a penalty counts 11-5, they didn't have anything go against them. But they probably did during the course of that game. If that's what you want to analyse, my argument would be that's not what the focus would be. And on the Monday morning, when Salford themselves were doing the review of their own performance, I would suspect that Paul Rowley would be talking about, why didn't we get across in cover a bit more? And when we had the ball in hand in the first half, when we were moving it quite nicely, uncharacteristically, we did drop quite a lot of ball. We didn't complete enough sets of 6. We didn't put pressure on Leeds for long enough to tire them out. Now, again, you can spend all of your social media time if you want clipping it areas where you think there's been an injustice, but as a coach and I think as a player, you wouldn't look at that. You wouldn't be expected to look at that. You're not going to beat the team you play next week if you focus on the obvious outlet is the referee made some mistakes. And whilst ever that's hard for fans to to take into account when they look at the result on the league table, I would say this, wouldn't I? But Aaron Moore's performance was not the reason why Salford lost.
I don't think Salford fans like us anyway, so it's okay. Well, maybe Gemma Carter does, I don't know, but probably not. Are Leeds back? I'm concerned, Phil, that Leeds are back now because, at that time of year where they're going to win the grand final, or at least get there.
I think the dogged way they kept in a game that they could quite easily have lost and beat a team that are just above them on the league table without ever really getting into first gear in terms of their attacking capabilities. Admittedly, they were without Blake Austin, who's been so important to that in the previous couple of weeks. You can only string wins together at this time of the season to make yourself contenders. That's 3 in a row, all in a very different style. They've got another big game on Friday night, home to Hull KR, who they've just gone above in the league. But again, that would put pressure on Salford. And if results were to go their way, they won and Salford lost, would leave them in the top 6 at the time of the season where, again, with virtually all the squad fit and consecutive victories under their belt, they do become a threat because they know how to win the big games.
Even if all the personnel change.
I'm sorry, everyone. I'm sorry. That's just how it is.
The Pro Leeds podcast. When did that happen? If we were handing out awards right now for Club of the Year, and I know we're halfway into this, well, no, past halfway into the season, then the Club of the Year in Super League would be the Leigh Leopards, who have rebranded in a comical way. Granted, they haven't got a website yet, but they are second in the table. They're in the semi-finals of the Challenge Cup. I said to Edwin Pape at the start of the season in a comical way, almost all the pressure was taken off the players and the coach at the start of the season because of the rebrand. And well, you can't say that now because they've won 12. They win again at Castleford at the weekend. They've got Salford this weekend. If all results went their way, they could go top of the table by the end of the week, which would be some story in 2023.
Oh, it's astonishing. I mean, I think Adrian Lamb deserves an enormous amount of credit, not only for the way he's prepared his team, the tactics he's played, but the fact that the belief that he's had clearly going into the season has translated itself into the players. They've kept most of them fit. They play a lovely, attractive style of rugby. They've got some key players in the spine positions that are playing well every week, not least his son Lachlan, who again, if we were to give a man of steel 2/3 into the season, I reckon he'd be it. And he'd probably be fighting off John Asiata for the crown as well. No, it's an amazing success story because we haven't seen a promoted team perform as well as this ever in the summer era. And I don't think needs to look further than that. Off the field, clearly their pre-match entertainment has been brilliant. The buy-in. I think, it's harsh to use the word comical about their rebrand. I think we may have thought that in February and looked at, are you using the right logo when is it really a leopard? And is the shirt great, or, does it need revamping a little bit to get you? Forget all of that. The town has bought into it. The fans have bought into it. Nobody really is calling them Centurions anymore. They are leopards. And in that sense, the rebranding has worked. And again, I think you've got to take your hat off to Derek Beaumont, who again can be a figure of fun occasionally. Sometimes he perhaps tweets when he shouldn't, and maybe about things that he shouldn't. But all in all, I think his leadership and his financing has been almost impeccable this year for what they've been trying to achieve. And I wouldn't want to take anything away from what they've done. The problem they're going to have is if this success comes back and bites them, because 2 or 3 of their players, you can imagine, would be very sought after in the NRL, and then you've got to almost start this process again. But for where they are at the moment, team of the year without question.
I just echo that. It's tremendous. I was looking at Twitter this week. I saw some interesting stats on promoted teams and what they have on and have done and what they haven't done. And one that stood out was that there's no promoted club that has won 15 games since Oldham in 1982-83, which is 83 was the year I was born. So it's such a long time ago. But what they've won 12 games, so they're not far off that, and you'd expect them to get at least 15 games between now and the end of the season. So I think historically that just proves it, doesn't it? As Phil said, that they're certainly the best promoted team in the Super League era.
Smart recruitment, and an owner who's obviously got the money to back up his mouth, which must be substantial, knowing Derek Beaumont's reputation. They've done.
I think we shouldn't lose sight of the style that they played as well, because again, it hasn't been 5 drives and a kick. They've played wonderfully entertaining rugby, scored a lot of tries. They like to move the ball. They're not frightened to express themselves. They're doing it off the back of an aggressive pack of forwards who can play. And if we are talking about John Asiata, yeah, he's tough. You wouldn't want to be stopping him if he was running at you, but he's got a beautiful late offload in him, and that's giving people like Lamb and Reynolds the chance to spread the ball. They've got old heads in sort of Hardacre and Briscoe who just know how to manage a game, and they've stayed they have stayed injury free. There was that amazing stat the other day as who's got the most ever presence, and it's something special when you've got the smallest squad but the most number of people that have played all the games this season. That's something about the conditioning staff, the training regime, the fact that they've spread the workload about themselves. I just don't think you can. I think we maybe underestimated Adrian Lamb. He took Wigan clearly to a grand final that was lost by a fingertip, but was then dispensed with. And you thought, is Lee a retrograde step when going back into the Championship? Clearly it isn't. He's a fantastic coach. And again, wouldn't want to put any dampeners under the success that Lee have had so far this year. But you would be very surprised if teams in the NRL were not looking at him. Bearing in mind he's still the assistant coach of Australia, who clearly don't play often enough. But he's still very highly thought of over there. And you would think, particularly if there was interest in his son, and I'm not saying this because I wish him to leave, either of them to leave Lee. We want the best talent over in our competition, but you'd be very surprised if certain clubs weren't looking at him as a potential assistant coach, his son as a leading player. But forget all about that. Enjoy the season. I tell you what, the semi-finals coming up are almost impossible to predict. And even though St Helens are favourites in terms of the bookies for the Challenge Cup, that is a semi-final where Lee have got absolutely nothing to lose. And the players that they've got and the manner that they played, they'll trouble Saints. And Lee at Wembley would be another fantastic chapter in this wonderful story this year.
On the flip side of that, though, Castleford beaten at home again, and they are being dragged into this thing at the bottom thanks to Wakefield winning again against the odds against Wigan. But while Wakefield are bringing in players, Castleford just seem to be... Is stagnant the right word?
Yeah, that's how it appears, from the outside looking in. I think Wakefield's upturn has been contributed by some mid-season signings, hasn't it? And when you look at Castleford, I'm not sure really who they've signed, if any. And something has to change. That Wakefield have got 3 wins now out of the last 4 games, is it? And they've got a huge game this week away at Huddersfield. I don't think people would have predicted Huddersfield going to Catalan and winning there, but from Wakefield's perspective, playing in 12th, playing 10th, they'll fancy their chances at Huddersfield, and suddenly if they win that, they're potentially on the same points as Castleford. So the fight towards the bottom end of the table is just as important as the fight to get into the top six. But yeah, I think you sort of speak to Castleford fans, they're concerned about the direction that the club generally is heading. I think we've discussed it before, haven't we, about Wakefield with the new stand and the potential takeover there. And I think that's the concern for Castleford supporters, is that where is the club going long term, even sort of beyond what's happening at the moment, and where they are in terms of where they are in the league table and their form. What's the long term?
I think Huddersfield's astonishing win in Perpignan, which probably hasn't got enough credit because, again, we didn't see it and we didn't tend to see it live. You're following it on the radio or social media, and it deserved better because that's their best performance of the season, and one that, again, we just would not have predicted. I think that makes it a straight 2-horse race now in relegation, that there was a possibility, if the Giants had been heavily beaten in Perpignan, that playing Wakefield this week and Castleford in a fortnight's time, that it would have been a 3-horse race. But clearly, from where they were against Leeds, and Ian Watson basically saying that, arguably the worst performance they've had under him, the 2 weeks following that, they've turned that around, and that is astonishing. That to be in contention at Wigan for long periods, and then to win away in Perpignan, which is one of the hardest places to go, I think that does show that they've got enough there to not even be worried about looking down. That they could, if they wanted to, still sneak a playoff place if they go on a run. But that makes Wakefield's game against them harder. Wakefield have won their 3 games all at home. They haven't yet won away, so that's going to be another test for them. But I think when you do win 27-26 and, in Golden Point extra time, then that tells you something about the character of the side. They have been beaten heavily on a couple of occasions this year, but in a lot of those games, even the ones they lost in that long run at the start of the season, they were in it to a point and then conceded and then fell away because they knew they didn't have enough points in them. The character of the team and the effort that they were putting in was never really questioned. I'm not sure where Castleford are on either of those fronts. That was a poor defeat at home to Lee in the fact that they were never really in it. And I don't know, Huddersfield, Wakefield again, and just picked up Josh Griffin, haven't they? I know he's banned and probably won't play until, is it the last 3 rounds of the season maybe, but having another body coming in at this stage who was proven quality, who was playing really well at Hull before they let him go, scoring a lot of tries, going back to a club where he's been before, that fits a side that are going places. Castleford at the moment being linked with a couple of PNG props, and again, I don't know how quickly they would get them over here. I don't know how quickly they'd get up to speed to play at Super League level, but I'm not sure that coming in at this late stage in the season, that's going to make a huge amount of difference to them. It's where is Castleford's next win going to come from? And the longer that they go to that game at Wakefield in August, which now will be on Sky Live, could well be £1 million game in the making, the harder it's going to be for them. They're at Hull this week, which is traditionally a really tough game between those two teams. But you hesitate to say that they're in a last chance saloon or they're getting there because of what Huddersfield did this week, because of what Wakefield did this week. So I think we'd be foolish to predict to which wire this is going to go down to. But of the two, I would be more worried if I was a Castleford fan.
Yeah, Wakefield lose on Friday and Castleford win on Saturday, and everything, the whole picture changes again. The worry I have about these players that Cass are signing from PNG is I'm sure I've read these headlines for at least a month, 2 months, and nothing seems to be happening with them. Whereas Wakefield seems to, Josh Griffin's coming. He signed now. Hull have released it, now he's signed up. Obviously, he should have that 7-game ban rescinded now he's moved clubs. Obviously, that's very much my opinion. The prolific Tom Lynham again with a try for Wakefield. And Will Dagger, who, many, when the initial deal was made with the swap for Corey Hall, thought, oh no, we're getting the rough end of the deal here. But here's how these things work. It's like when Paul McShane went to Cass and Wakefield got, what's his name? Scott Moore, and we all know what happened from there. Hull FC win the derby against Hull Kingston Rovers, 16 points to 6. Hull FC are back now, in front of a crowd of not applicable, but it looked full. Interesting game. Hull KR going into these semi-finals. I know they've got the game this week against Leeds, obviously, but then the semi-final against Wigan at Headingley again. They're low on bodies now. They've had the problem that Lee haven't had. That they are running short on men to put out on the field.
Yeah, I think we spoke about that before on the injuries that the Hull KR have had. I was actually surprised how well they stuck in that game. It was a bit of a tough watch, the whole derby, but ultimately it was a close contest. I think there were two teams that played particularly well, and they seem to lack a little bit of creativity, missing Jordan Abdul in the half, certainly. But it was a good defensive performance generally, and but away at Wigan, it would be a neutral venue, obviously, but in terms of the semi-final in a couple of weeks' time to play Wigan, they're going to have to improve a little bit on that whole derby performance. I would suggest that. Yeah, I'm not really sure what the answer is there for Hull KR. They seem to have kind of lost their way a little bit over the last few weeks. Albeit, as I say, I didn't think it was a disastrous performance in the whole derby by any stretch of the imagination, but they just seem to lack a little bit of creativity.
I think that derby result showed how far Hull have come. That obviously Good Friday they were absolutely trounced, and put in the kind of performance again that I think would really please the coaching staff. That again, not flash, not many opportunities. Take what you've got, go to a hostile environment, and come away with the points. Tony Smith won't dwell on it being a derby, but I think he'd be very satisfied with the fact that that was really solid and the kind of performance that they wouldn't have put in maybe 6-7 weeks ago. So a good win for Hull. I think Rovers seem to think that Brad Schneider will help them. They brought him in from Canberra, halfback, 23 years old. They're going to throw him in this week against Leeds, and I think they would hope that will give him sufficient game time and awareness of what Super League's about to play in that semi-final. Because they were shorn of creativity. They do need that, and clubs are sort of working out how to play with the Jeslett and Matt Parcell duality, because they can't both really play at hooker. One of them's been sort of playing in the halves, and that's changed the dynamic a little bit. But I do think that there is enough strike at Rovers to get out of this, and their pack is very hard working. They've got James Batchelor back this week as well, who when he was injured at Magic Weekend was in terrific form. Sets a great lead. So it is good for the semi-final. It's going to be down to bodies, but they'll want some kind of a performance at Leeds going into that game. They won't want to be doing it, trying to conjure up something that they haven't done for the last 3 or 4 weeks. And I think again, something Willie Peters has said in the lead up to this week's game is they've gone away from who they are, because I think he's got a way that he wants them to not only play but be perceived. If they can get that back over the next fortnight, they will be a threat to Wigan, but they just need the right number of bodies back who can turn a game.
No, I assume, because I was working in Leeds on Friday night, so I missed the Wakefield drama. I was watching on Twitter. That Darryl Powell did his press conference before I got home. But another win for St Helens, another defeat for Warrington, and Saints now third in the table. Warrington down to fifth, and Saints going on the Leeds playbook of lulling everyone into a false sense of security at the start of the season, and now winning games and building their grand final. Was it 5 in a row they're going for? Some ridiculous 5, Pete. That's it, isn't it? That they're going for this year, and now they're back as well. They are definitely back now.
It was a tremendous game. That it was one of the games of the season, I think, and for the Warrington fans that have been worried about where they're heading and what they're doing, I think that might have given them some reassurance. I know they didn't get the result, but the performance was certainly there. And they're too good a side to not be in that top 6, surely. Based on that performance, they've just got to be consistent now with that. But I thought the game kind of had everything really, including a little bit of controversy around a couple of passes, albeit I didn't think it was either were that forward, and it shows the influence that Sky commentary can have on public perception, because there wasn't much conversation about the the Dodd try in the second half, but there was far more conversation about the one in the first half. But that's just the way it goes. It was, as I say, it was just a great contest, and if you're a champion side, which is what St Helens are, then you find a way to win, and that's exactly what they did.
I think the only worry I'd have if I was a Warrington fan was that they did get to 20-12 up. And again, if they are going to seriously contend on the grand final front, which they're desperate for, they're going to be coming up against situations like that in the playoffs, where once you're ahead, you've got to find a way of closing the game down. Clearly, throw George Williams into what they did last week, and there is a possibility they would have won that game. But it's just pleasurable as a neutral to watch a game of that high level of skill and intensity. And whatever we say about whether there was a slight forward pass or not, there were a couple of tries in that game that were of the highest quality, and that other sports would have been lauding, going from end to end and rippling through numerous pairs of hands. The Matt Duffy try for Warrington must be one of the contenders for try of the season. Absolutely brilliant. And I think, again, there was almost a slightly hushed atmosphere at the beginning because the Warrington fans didn't really know what to expect. But it didn't take long for them to really get into it. And it was just another example. Those two teams tend to produce wonderfully attacking spectacles. And at a time of the year where there isn't a lot of other live sport in terms of ongoing weekly competition, clearly we've got some big events at the moment that are one-offs, like the Test match and Wimbledon, and the Open Golf's about to start. But in terms of a rolling narrative, to watch Warrington last Thursday and then the following week, and the difference in the way they played without a massive change in personnel, we've got so much to be grateful of at the moment, and a competition that really we should be lauding rather than worrying about whether a pass was for or not. Again, Warrington had enough opportunities, particularly when they were ahead, to win that game, rather than look back at whether or not one of the tries scored against them was from a forward pass that actually they'd already overcome during that game.
You need IMG to grade referees, and you get 0.001 for every forward pass taken. I don't know. That was all Super League. That was all Super League. There was no massive. Well, there was controversy. We'd spoken about at the start, but nothing else. So that was good. Before we get on to the championship, well done, Canberra Raiders, who managed to do a viral thing. I don't know if they won their game or not, but a shame, as I predicted what the tweet of the week went for in the paper, because he's an odious. I was going to say a word I can't say then, but yeah. But yeah, well done to Canberra. And if you took it in the wrong spirit, then you're an idiot. In the championship, what a win for Batley. 42-0 over Halifax Panthers. Well done to our man, Craig Lingard. He's on the front of the magazine, Phil. Have you got the magazine in front of you? It's out this week. Oh, is that at the bottom? Just seeing there. Featherstone beat Swinton 52-6. Not so good news for Martin Kellner.
York he went to the game as well. I said, of all the games to choose to go to, why on earth did you choose that one? It's because he lived down the road. But regretted it.
Keighley 10, York 50. Big win in the Andrew Henderson derby. York, this shows you how tight it is, isn't it? At the bottom of the championship, York have gone from, and they're not, I'm not saying they're safe or anything, but they've gone from, was it fourth bottom to just a couple of wins outside the playoffs now, which it's a ridiculously tight division.
I think it shows that they had a number of injuries earlier on in the year, didn't they? And they've got some key players back, and that they're turning their fortunes around. But I noticed Keighley have got a new coach this week, Matt Foster. He must have hopped on a plane from Queensland, from the Gold Coast, was it? Burleigh Bears, I think, where he was sort of involved in coaching, and a bit of a Cougars legend. So I think he's sort of coming in to hopefully try and ensure that they maintain their championship status this year.
I guess the issue for him, and he may well be a very, very good coach, is that clearly he's not coached in the championship, and he won't know the group of players that he's got. That's a hell of an ask for somebody coming in from halfway around the world. And again, almost tainted with those words, Cougar legend, like turn up and turn the fortunes around it. If only it was as simple as that. Otherwise, every club would be coached by a former legend. I mean, there were a couple of results that really stood out in the championship. One of them was that York result, which I think throws Keighley really into the relegation mix? Because when you lose at home by that margin, that would be a concern. I think the other one is London, who've almost gone under. Well, there's another two on the back of that because obviously there was a game on Monday. But let's take London first. I know they've signed Dean Farray and they've signed Corey Norman, and that's gesture of intent in that division, if ever you wanted to make one. But you looked at a win against Toulouse with Ollie Leyland's the key player. Who's one of the youngsters that they brought through from Kent, where the game was played at Ebbsfleet. They are, again, I think more than perhaps even looking at a playoff spot, which they're not far off. Now they're now playing Halifax, who are in a huge lull at the moment in the 1895 semi-final. London at Wembley is an intriguing prospect, and what that would mean for the game in the capital. And that's not to say they're going to win that game, because clearly Simon Griggs is a very good coach, but he would have been concerned at the manner of the defeat at Batley. 42-0 is a huge whooping for a team that themselves are still in the sixth. And the other result was Widnes, who again have been through a huge amount of turmoil, changing John Keir, losing some of their players against the Bradford side that seemed resurgent, beating them on Monday night on the Viacom transmission, which apparently buffered for quite a lot of the time. And whilst I have no idea what that actually means, didn't sound very good. But again, what a result. You go from the depths of despair and Widnes are going to be pulled into the relegation battle to now thinking, Widnes could nick that playoff spot if Halifax's form continues. So, yeah, like we say, the no form line in Super League, there isn't in the Championship. And you look at Newcastle again, who've thrown themselves a lifeline with a win against Whitehaven.
Sheffield beat Barrow 36-18. Obviously, the concerning missives coming out of Whitehaven now asking for fans to donate money. As mentioned last week, these are difficult times for everyone, whether you're a professional sports club or just the regular Joe or Josephine on the street. So is it a surprise that a club who are at that bottom end of the Championship, obviously don't have wealthy backers, are struggling? And I guess the answer to that question is, well, not really, no. It's how do you manage expectations of supporters who obviously want to be as high as possible, but also not bankrupt yourself at the same time? And that's the difficult thing for club owners from the top of Super League to the bottom of League One.
I think that's the challenge, isn't it? Rugby League's often been built around one or two wealthy owners or directors involved in clubs, and where you've got a club that doesn't have that, which appears to be the case in Whitehaven, then you are going to be prone to that. I mean, I think they've budgeted for slightly larger crowds than they're getting, which is obviously not helping the revenue. And you've got to budget back in late last year, and perhaps not knowing exactly what your income stream is going to be. It's tricky, but I guess that's business. But if you haven't got somebody with some deep pockets that you can go to when things get tough, but it's not a great look, is it? Going, putting yourself on GoFundMe or whatever it is that they're on. It's a really poor look for a semi-professional competition, a semi-professional club, really.
If only London Irish had done. And let's not go there. But does it also say something about the dearth of talent in Cumbria at the moment, which we know is a hotbed and we want to keep going? And maybe not dearth of talent in terms of there's some really good quality players playing in the community competition, but that they don't want to transfer into the semi-professional ranks. And where was before, Workington, Whitehaven, I don't know if we do include Barrow because it's perennial debate about whether that's in Cumbria or not. But certainly those two clubs, the traditional ones, they don't seem to have that ready supply of young players coming through who are match ready to play at Championship level. And it might be to do with the fact that we've heard it before that, a lot of these players have got very good jobs at people like BNFL. And they don't want to necessarily just give up their social side of playing rugby to reduce their time at work and suffer potential injury and play in a part-time basis. I just wonder whether that's something that is specific to Cumbria at the moment, because there doesn't seem to be that same level of player recruitment. And whilst it's great that the figures that were brought out with the RFL accounts indicated there were 6% more people playing in the community game, I just don't know whether that is the case up in Cumbria at the moment.
It's a long time really since Whitehaven or Workington were pushing the top end of the championship table, isn't it? Workington have sort of yo-yoed a little bit in and out of the championship, and Whitehaven have probably been mid-table towards the bottom end of the championship and themselves been, I think, in League One. So yeah, and I mean, people talk about whether there should be a Super League team in Cumbria. I think you made the point there, Phil, isn't it? In terms of local talent, you're going to have to pay people enough to leave their good jobs at BNFL to become a full-time professional athlete, never mind a part-time player. But it's a shame because, as you say, the community game up there is strong. And you know, the game doesn't really want to see one of its clubs go to the wall.
We ask these questions so often and for so long that maybe there just isn't an answer to the Cumbrian question. Maybe there just isn't an answer. It's not as simple as saying, let's put a team in Super League there because of the historical rivalries between the two sides, unless there is a real will between those two clubs to want to do it, and how you do it, and if you keep the other two clubs in League One or whatever. And it's one of those. And is the stadia there for in the area that would be at Super League standard, which is not a thing anymore? But you know what I mean. It's all these little things that add up. Yeah, does anyone have the answer anymore?
Yeah, I think IMG have the answer, and I know it doesn't suit all people, and I know that clearly there are some vociferous people who are against the fact that you're trying to manufacture what competitive sport might look like. But the truth is, you also have to play to what you've got and not what you think you have or what you used to have. And it may well be that bringing out these grading criteria, which I know we've all spent hours poring over now that they're publicly available. I know I've been doing nothing else most evenings. And my word, they're complicated, which is great because, you know, it's transparent. You get to see them. But for the clubs themselves, they now need to take the kind of decisions that you were just talking about. If Cumbria is serious about having a Super League presence, they now have a route that tells them what they've got to do to get to that. Now, whether they want to talk to each other about doing it together, whether one of them thinks they're strong enough to do it apart, what they've got is the template. And if we do stick to it and it is rigidly enforced and people get away from the fact that it's all about whether you've got an electronic sign hoarding and how many Twitter followers you've got, which it isn't. That is a very small part of a very big project. And it's ironic as well as we make the point in the magazine, because we're looking at whether this has been the closest season ever, particularly at Super League level. The fact is we should be looking at what's happening on the field at the moment, and we've now got a big document telling us what needs to happen off the field, and there's a certain irony about that. But what it does for places like Cumbria, it says, you want to be at this level, that's what you got to do. You go away and tell us how you're going to do it. There's quite an interesting point made by Carl Hall in his feature on League One about how Doncaster are going about looking at it, and they're not querying the fact that those standards and conditions are now there. They're looking at how they make the best of it, and I guess that's what every club should be doing.
It's all, yeah. I mean, I'm already sick of reading people saying, "Well, this club has got this many points, and they're going to be in the Super League, and this team's not." And it's like, you don't know. No one knows. The only people who know are the people who are actually going to be doing it at IMG, and I assume it's not just some people just making things up from the internet. But well, I mean, you never know; it could be. That's the championship. There's one thing else we should mention in the championship, because you mentioned it on Twitter on Monday, Phil, ironically. And because this goes back to why do referees get abused? Well, A, because it's ingrained within us. They are the evil people. Sorry, James, you are evil. But because, you know, our teams are the ones wearing white hats, the opposition's the bad guys, and the referees are part of the bad guys because they're the 14th, 18th, whatever man, 19th man. But when the clubs themselves on social media cast aspersions on decisions made by the match officials and have done this constantly for years and nothing changes, then I ask, why aren't the RFL doing something about it? Because this is not a new issue. You know, it's different from, I know people saying, oh, the commentary on BBC Radio, whatever is biased, and whether it is or not, that's of no problem to me whatsoever. It is what it is. It's an editorial decision. But when a club tweets the referee got it wrong, that is an issue. That is an issue, and it does need to be dealt with.
I think that's the point that I was hoping to make. was that this is an official outlet. This is not to say fans can't criticise officials. It's their inalienable right to do so. How they do it and in what manner they do it, we can debate and have debated, and clearly there is no tolerance for any level of abuse. But what stirs up the fans, perhaps, to criticise the referee is when they see their official club social media account saying that a man in the middle has got a decision wrong. Now, they're watching it, as far as I know, the same as we are. You know, they're at the ground, they're probably in the press box. They have an instantaneous view of something. They don't have recourse to being right next to it on the field. They don't, have the ability to look at it at different angles. They are making an instantaneous judgment on what they've seen. And if the official social media feed of any club, and it's not aimed at the two clubs that happen to be playing, it was just exacerbated by watching what we were watching and seeing some of their reaction to it, that becomes an official mouthpiece of that club. Whether the club like it or not, whether they put somebody in charge of their social media feed who's employed by them, or whether it's a volunteer, or whether it's a fan, it doesn't matter. That is the official, at that moment, opinion of that club on that decision. And if you don't use the word allegedly, if you don't use things like suspected, if you say, oh, the opposition have run away and scored a try because the official has made a mistake, then you are giving license to all of your fans to have a mass pile-on. And I think that, that is something that the game itself needs to take far more seriously. And that it might be an education thing in the first instance. Who have you got doing your social media feed? What have you briefed them on what they can and can't say? It might be that if it's something that you continually do, you have to be fined. There has to be a consequence. I look at some of the social media feeds, for example, of people like Sheffield, and they are very, very funny. I don't know who is in charge of their feed, but it's very self-deprecating. It never blames an official for a deficiency of the team, and often it takes the mickey out of themselves if they've done something wrong, and that is really commendable. I look at some other clubs and I say I didn't name them deliberately. People want to equate the fact that a game was on as to when that comment was made. That's entirely up to them. But there are some who get it consistently wrong, and who, again, going back to the Salford Leeds game, look for a blame outlet at the time of an incident. And it's wrong that should be under the club's official crest, in my opinion.
I'm presuming the Sheffield social media is not run by Mark Aston, because he's famous for criticising referees. But you're absolutely right. It does open the floodgates. And, I would have thought it should be in the operational rules somewhere. So that might be a task for you, Richard, for the next week. Some bedtime reading again.
I've got to do some hoovering. I'm in trouble. I mean, fair play to Wakefield. When I worked there, they didn't give me the password to Twitter, so I couldn't get in trouble. So that was good. That's the Championship. League One. Cornwall have done the double over London Scholars. 30 points to 14. Midlands. They're a team who seem to do well in the first half and then drop off in the second, which is I'm not criticising them for that, because obviously they did that against Hunslet, who were second in the table, 18-all at half time. 54-22 at full time. They do appear to be a team who are growing, and apparently a decent crowd in Derby as well. So another new venue for the sport. Oldham beat North Wales 37-24, and Workington 40 points to 12 winners over Rochdale, who are currently remain the worst of the traditional sides in the sport, unfortunately, for the old Hornets. But there you go. League One, Dewsbury having the week off. So let's close that gap on them. They take on Oldham this week, also in League One. Cornwall Midlands and North Wales versus Workington. Just we got another week off as well. What's going on? Championship this week, Widnes Bradford, that's been. Championship on Saturday, Toulouse Batley. Sunday, Barrow Fev, Halifax Newcastle, Keighley Widnes, Swinton London, Whitehaven Bradford, and York versus Sheffield. Super League, it's Saints Catalans on Thursday, Huddersfield Wakefield, Leeds, Hull KR, and Wigan Warrington, the TV game on Friday, Hull Castleford on Saturday, and Salford Lee on Sunday. Interesting results in the wheelchair Super League this week, Phil. I meant to go on Saturday and couldn't get there in the end, but victory for London Roosters, 36-30 over Leeds. So very good win for London, who continue to impress this year.
Well, and a game again that went absolutely down to the last play. That London were ahead early on. Certainly they were ahead at half time. I think 26-10 or something like that. And Leeds edged it as Leeds wheelchair seemed to do. And London came back and won it with the last play of the game, which I'm told big crowd, at Leeds University Sports Hall, and a great game, and it sets it up both joint top of the league for the run-in to see who gets the league leader shield. I think the other thing that we probably need to say about wheelchair rugby league is that you mentioned quite rightly that Canberra went viral. And I don't know whether IMG have had a say in this, but our social media presence as a sport seems to be getting better. We seem to be able to get the right clips on to make the widest impact, and to see the three people at Wimbledon being shown to the crowd, and alongside some real, not that they're not, but nationwide sporting treasures, was fantastic. And who advised Tom Halliwell that he needed to wear a three-piece suit? It looked so dapper with his cup of tea and the royal box at Wimbledon. But the reception that he got, and that James Simpson got, and Rob Hawkins got, and it nobody blinked twice that they deserved to be in that setting. And the number of outlets that retweeted that, not least Wimbledon themselves, was fantastic. And clearly that wasn't the reason why Leeds lost their wheelchair game, because Tom was down in London, and so was their coach. Brilliant for the sport that we had that result, and it keeps it open. But perhaps even more meritorious for the sport was that those guys decided that they shouldn't play in that game. They should go and represent it at the highest possible level, and they got the feedback that it deserved, and looked like they had a damn good time as well.
And they got better seats than Sir Anthony McCoy and Sir Steve Redgrave. See, and Rob Hawkins is coming on later this week, so we'll ask him about it. I don't know if he's a tennis fan or not, but you're one of these freeloaders who turns up at Wimbledon like all the other celebrities. But it was an amazing, was it, when you saw it and you think, I know everyone's normal, but everyone's normal, but they're in there with these really famous worldwide sports people, and there they are. Them people, we know them people, we've seen them. It was great, and Rob obviously didn't need to play for Halifax because they won 56-22 over Warrington. Although when I initially saw the result, he said that Warrington had won, so I don't know what happened there, but when I've checked back, they didn't win. And Wigan beat Hull on Sunday in the other game in the wheelchair Super League. Challenge Cup this week in Hull. So if you are around on, I think Saturday afternoon, head down to Hull, and we'll ask Rob more about that later. Elsewhere in the Women's Super League, York 48, Huddersfield 8. York resting some players because they've got a couple of big games coming up. St Helens won 60 points to 6 over Warrington. Leeds beating Wigan 52-0. The return of Kathleen Beers came back last week, didn't she? Or was she back this week? Anyway, she's back anyway. Lee beat Castleford 44-0. Featherstone beat Bradford 46-0 in the Group 2, in which Barrow beat Salford 28-12, which leads us into this week, where in Group 1 it's Wigan, Warrington and York Leeds. I don't think York Leeds is going to be broadcast anywhere, is it? I'm assuming not, because no one's mentioned it. Although usually waits until I say, it should be on telly, and then it gets mentioned. Barrow, Fev, Lee, Bradford and Salford Cass in Group 2. York, top of the table, 5 wins from 5. Saints with 4 from 5. Leeds 3 from 5. Next week, it's the press conference for the Challenge Cup semi-final. Leeds take on Wigan again. The first thing you ask Lewis Russell is, so that result last week, then, does that mean anything going into a semi-final? And if she's as cliched as every other coach, she'll say, no. It's what it is. And we're all excited because the collective amnesia, is this a thing? Because I swear, we all knew that George Roach signed a 5-year contract at Newcastle a month ago, 6 weeks ago. It was on the NRL website. And then Newcastle announced it this week as if it was new news. Is there anything else to talk about? Or have we done everything? Everyone's quiet. I feel like I've monopolised the end of the programme, but no. But should we do our AMG special next week? No. We'll be back hopefully on Monday in the usual time and place. But the new magazine is out. Philly's helpfully waving it at us. What's in it?
12th birthday issue as well.
Happy birthday, 4020 magazine.
So I was working out. We've probably written about 5.5 million words about rugby league in those 12 years. And some of them were spelt correctly. We've got some brilliant columnists, funnily enough, 2 of which happen to be on the line at the moment and have had some wonderful contributors and still do. So to anybody who is following us and does buy the magazine or would move it in a news agency if they saw it nearer the front, which we ask everybody to do. Thank you. To get to 12 years and 145 issues is ridiculous. We think there might be a little exclusive in there, but I don't want to say what it is yet until it hits the newsstands in the shops on Friday. Something that may have been said inadvertently that possibly give us a hint about some international decision that may be being made soon, which could be just an error on their part, or possibly actually what will be announced in Singapore at the end of July. So keep an eye out for that. And yeah, I won't spoil it for you, but just thank you to everybody who has got us to where we are. And we've got a new book out on Salford, which we mentioned last week, which, irrespective of their result and the ire of their fans and the fact that it's by a Leeds publisher, people are buying at the moment. So thank you for that as well.
Like I say, some people are now going to have to boycott the book because...
Well, please don't. It's wonderfully researched.
And if you are in your local news agents, especially those ones in bus stations or whatever, make sure it's in front of Rugby World. Just make sure it's in. That's the best one to put in front of, isn't it, Phil? World Cup final. James, anything you want to say as we finish this program? No, he's on mute, so he's not bothering. Right. We'll see you back here on Monday. Fingers crossed at the usual time, unless things change. Thanks for listening and watching, and we'll see you again next week. Buy the magazine.